tonight the format's a little bit different. And I'll introduce him in a second. We have a speaker, but he really is a representative of a network. He's not going to talk for too long. Then we're going to have a panel that you'll see when I introduce them really span the Long Beach community for engagement in these issues. Then we're going to open it up for you to ask questions of anybody, even each other. And then at the end, you'll all come down, and on your way out, we'll be giving you the book that you'll be learning about. So everybody can pick up a book, and the idea is you go out and you can even talk more about it. There's a bar with cocktails. We call it Cocktails and Conversation. And there's some fun things for you to do sort of surrounding the book.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks to your whole team for inviting me and making us all feel so welcome here. So we have another, there we are, okay. So this is not going to be a lecture about climate, it's not going to be a lecture, it's not going to be a lecture about the facts of climate change, policy, science, or anything. It's going to be a story of how this book and several other things came to be, because I believe the story itself is emblematic of how we can, as individuals, come together and take action to do the things that matter to us. So the Carbon Almanac is a book published this past July by Penguin. It is a bestseller on multiple Amazon categories. Amazon has listed it as one of the best science books of 2022, although science is only a part of it. So how did this happen? Well, the obvious thing is it started with identifying a problem. And there is what is called a climate emergency. And this fact affects people in many different ways. And I'll get to that in just a second. What we really looked at as we started this was where's the gap in information? Where's the gap in activating people? And this idea was the brainchild of a well-known author, an entrepreneur named Seth Godin. This book was his idea, but he is not the only author of this, as you'll see. But the idea was that when you look at the landscape, there are these wonderful books that are long scientific works or long policy works that really don't reach most people. In addition, there's a lot of science which is way beyond what most people believe they can understand. And then there's a lot of political noise. And that noise and all the rest creates this. And this is a page from one of the first pieces in the book, that we seem to divide ourselves into sort of three categories. So, which here we call the wizard, the prophet, and the ostrich. And we don't do that. Charles Mann, an author, coined these terms. And so think of the wizard as the person who sees the solutions to things as always more of innovation, of technology and of science that will solve our increasing problems. And I'll think of the prophet as almost the opposite, and that's sort of the ecological movement on some level. People who say, we need to slow down, we need to do less. Both are important, both are valid. And those need to be in dialogue with each other all the time. The third category is obviously the ostrich. And I think when it comes to climate, the ostrich falls into two camps. So one group, maybe the largest group, are the people who say, yeah, sure, the climate's changing, but that's just nature, and we're not responsible, so we don't need to do anything to solve the problems. And the other group are those who are in active denial. It's very hard if you're someone who believes that climate change is happening, that it has what's called anthropogenic causes, and that there are actions we can take. It's very hard to talk with those people, but there's a huge number of people who simply don't know the basic facts. And so the Carbon Almanac, and that term almanac's really important, set out to provide the basic facts in a way that was accessible to anybody, and would also give them insights into what mattered to them so they could take everyday action. Actually, I want to go back here. This point on the right is critical. There are many individual things that can happen, but sometimes we all feel, well, how can I, as an individual, do anything? Will it really make a difference? And in fact, and in the Almanac, there's a piece on this, some decades ago, a major advertising agency worked with the fossil fuel industry to come up with the idea of the carbon footprint. And the point of the carbon footprint was to make each individual responsible for climate without having the corporations themselves take any responsibility. It was brilliant in a certain way. But what we're about is linking individual action to systemic change. So that's sort of the core principles of the book. And so Seth wrote to a number of us, this was last September, and said, hey, you want to get involved? Described what he thought might be the project. And it eventually grew to about 300 people. Actually, it was in 40 countries at the time. Today, we're 2,500 people in 90 countries. And we all said, sure, we'll help out. We're all volunteers. The proceeds from the sales of the book go back into the work itself. There's no organization. There is no Carbon Almanac nonprofit or Carbon Almanac Inc. It's just a group of people who work around the world. Most of us didn't know each other, had no organization, and this cute little thing at the bottom, we all started, we weren't experts. A few of us maybe were, but most of us weren't. But we were committed to the purpose of the book, committed to doing something, and so we all just dove in. And probably a few dozen of us wrote, but somehow, and so somehow we got this done. And we started in September of last year, and we had to deliver this book, this 350-page book, which you'll all have soon, in mid-February. And I don't know how many of you know how book publishing works, but that's not how it happens. And so we had to lay out the editorial direction, we had to write and assign writers, we had to edit and assign editors, we had to fact check, we had to illustrate, we had to do infographics, we had to do all of that and deliver it. Oh, and then deliver the production-ready files to the publisher in mid-February. So, like, what can you do in 5 months? So we did this. This is the table of contents. There'll be no quiz on this right now, don't worry. But you can get a sense of the organization. There was a very basic intro, and then a little bit of the basic science of it, the impact of what we know about climate change, various solutions, and there we really have a strong kinship with the Drawdown project, drawdown.org, which is really an important player in all of this. And then who's responsible for which parts of all of this? And then a set of resources, both in print and online. I said before this wasn't all science. A lot of it is not. Because the problem, as I said, is not technology or the science. We know that. We didn't introduce anything new in that regard. The mystery is in our heads. Why are we not getting off our butts and acting? And so we try to explore some of that as well. So this is a table of contents. When you get the book, you'll dive in wherever you want. You don't have to read it front to back. This is an example. Actually, this is a piece that I wrote, and I think it's very timely for tonight's conversation. As I looked at what I wanted to work on, the thing that was most impressive to me was how young people from 9 years old through college, early 20s, were really leading the fight. And so there are, around the world, various class action suits being organized by youth against primarily governments. And I don't want to go into details about each of them. They're largely succeeding, except in the US. But if you think about litigation, right, when you bring a suit for harm that has happened already. And these kids are bringing suits for harm in the future, claiming that governments have forsaken their duty of care for the people of their nations. And they're starting to win. And I think this is a really profound and important change. And it has to happen in time, but it is happening. So this is the kind of articles that are throughout the Almanac. And then in the section on impact, you know, it's like, what can you do? You can, recycling is, we could talk about, but it's kind of not really impactful. Driving an EV, solar, all these things, composting are all great. But one of my collaborators in the network said, you know, where you bank makes a difference. And so I wrote this piece, and it has sort of changed my life, because your checking accounts and savings accounts in the commercial banks are generally used for the banks to go and then get more money to then make loans to, and on and on. So they need your money to invest. And because banking is highly concentrated now, you'll see on the top 4 banks in the US actually have invested about $1.2 trillion in fossil fuels in the past 5 years, since the Paris Treaty was signed. Well, this is kind of interesting, and if they don't have your money, it's hard for them to do that. But it's very hard to get your money out, as you'll find from a psychological perspective. So the book tries to look at all of these things that you can do and how you can do it in groups. And so that's the book, but we were just getting started, because when you have 5 months, right, you can do almost anything. And so we also did a free kids ebook called Generation Carbon. We did the photo book. You saw images from that in conjunction with Getty Images, who were really, really gracious about providing these images. We have 4 different podcast series. We're about to start season 2. We have a teacher's guide to the almanac itself. There are thousands of students using lesson plans developed by teachers today. So that was a lot. But we also have a daily email that goes out. We have a LinkedIn learning course. And the bottom 2 slides is this very interesting website, which is called Connect the Dots, which allows you to sort of get a topic of interest to you from the almanac and follow it through a sort of web of ideas to a point where you can take action. We also have 100 for-profit and nonprofit partners who help us get the word out with the books. And so that's the first year, and we'll see what the next year begins. This is really the key thing. For those of you who feel like, what could I possibly do? If we could do all that we just said, all of you can. We all can get involved. You don't have to be an expert. The contributors to the almanac were, you'll see, you don't see scientists here, right? You don't see policy expert. You see, you know, creators, artists, writers, marketers, translators. We have 6 different international editions, and a fair number of educators as well. But people had day jobs. One person runs a painting company, another is a design studio, and so forth. And so these are the only credentials we feel anybody needs. You need to care about the present, and you need to care about the future, and you need to know that your community can get involved. Speaking of which, as I said, we have 2,500 members of the network, and 3 Long Beach folks are here from the Carbon Almanac. And so, I don't know, Maureen, Catherine, and Lori. You'll meet them all later when you go to get your books. And it's important we do this. This picture probably many of you have seen. We have to solve this problem. There's no planet B. There's no plan B. And that's the story of the almanac. Thank you.
So now I get to introduce our panelists. I'll start with Carleen Hua, who's a planner with the city of Long Beach, and sort of more salient this evening, she is leading the implementation of Long Beach Climate Action Plan, which I believe just got passed by the City Council in August, you told me. So you have a big job, so welcome to the panel. And I'm glad Robert showed that slide about youth, because we have Naomi Scott, who is a senior at Rolling Hills High School, and she's a leader of the Aquarium's Teen Climate Council. Naomi. And lastly, Sean Devereux, who's a friend and an amazing leader in Long Beach. He's the executive director of Leadership Long Beach, which does a lot of good work in the community. Sean. So I sent all three of these panelists the book, and of course, they read the whole thing, cover to cover. But actually, what you'll see when you get it, one of the things I really love about it, it's one of these books that you just open a couple pages, you see an infographic, you see a cartoon, you see some data, you see a headline, and then you read it. And you know, you could read it during breaks, during anything, and it's just, it's incredibly useful and inspiring, but it's also fun and convenient to read. It really, really works. So what I want to ask you, since you've had 2 days to flip through the book, and I'll ask each of you this. So when you flip through it, just share your story of what in it caught your attention for whatever reason. I mean, it doesn't, you know, it could have caught your attention because it personally resonated, because of your job, just because you like the graphics or anything. And let's start with Carly.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so for me as a planner, how we view our environment, especially our urban environment, is really important when we talk about systemic change and how we can really impact the world around us. Our built environment really does affect our contribution to the atmospheric greenhouse gases concentration. And so learning about roundabouts, and more so learning about it in a way that is understandable to any person, whether they're a planner, whether they're just in college, anywhere. Learning that a simple roundabout can be just a unique and effective way to manage not just traffic, but our land uses as well.
Great, thank you. And Naomi.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes, okay. So when I first received this book a week ago, I had no idea how I was going to manage it all. But I just kind of started coasting through the table of contents, flipping through pages like PK recommended, and looking for things that stood out to me. And with every new little paragraph or page or a new discovery, it led me down a different train of thought, and I just kept taking notes and taking notes and taking notes. And for those of you who know me, I love taking notes. So that was very enjoyable and definitely confirmed I'm on the right career path. But I found this mini one-box comic on page 11, and it depicted these two stick figures talking about problem solving. But particularly not wanting to problem solve, not wanting to put in the work to actually solve the problems they were talking about. And it made me think about how people really don't want to solve a problem like climate change. You know, they might just ignore it altogether, or they might bring it up, and it'll get publicity for 2 seconds, then it'll die down again. It reminded me of talking about America's attention span in AP US history class last year. We all have problems that we want to solve in the US, but we get publicity for 2 seconds, and then it goes away before we make any difference. And maybe that's because it's exhausting to fight for a cause like this, as I'm sure many of you know, and many of the panelists up here with me. I'm only 17, so I've only had so much time to work on it, but I also know that this is what I want to dedicate my time to, and I have so much other stuff to worry about. It's impossible to know everything out there. Like recycling, for example, is supposed to be a simple, small, positive action that you can take, and yet there's so many intricate rules for how to do it that no one knows how to do it properly, including myself. But I was thinking that if this book or conversations like these have taught us anything, it's that taking these actions are necessary, but we aren't alone in taking them. Community and collaboration, not division and infighting about which renewable energy is the best, is what's going to provide us with the resources and the moral support that we really need to make a difference. And so despite all the information that there is to know out there and everything that you have to do, I find hope in the fact that I'm not alone in this fight. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Naomi, sadly, America's attention span is longer than mine. But Sean.
Thank you. I just want to comment that I read the page about roundabouts earlier today, and that was really awesome. I'm glad that you highlighted that. But the piece that really stuck out at me, just in first glance through the book, was the entry on page 114 about the 2020 COVID lockdown and how that impacted climate measures. And there was a 12% reduction in nitrogen dioxide across China, a 31.5% reduction in nitrogen dioxide across 6 major cities in India. Like, this is a marked decrease in emissions as a result of this horrible thing that we all went through, but it really just sort of illuminated that there can be some good with some of these tragedies that we experience. But every page that I turn to, it's illuminating and fascinating, and you can build an entire curriculum off of. So it's an incredible book.
Thank you very much, Sean. I said now, that's easy for you guys. So now we got to do something a little, every one of you are, I think it's obvious to the whole audience that you're leaders in the field, that you're really engaged in this. So now I want you to not talk about the book, but talk about what you do or would like to do or are doing either professionally or personally to engage in this issue. And let's start with you, Carlene.
So yes, I'm here from the city of Long Beach as a planner for the Department of Development Services. My role, or part of my role, is to help facilitate the implementation of the Long Beach Climate Action Plan, which was recently adopted on August 16th by our Long Beach City Council. In addition to that, I support development and try to review development in a way that looks towards a future that we have envisioned in our general plan, which largely regulates what our land uses are, as well as the Long Beach Climate Action Plan to build the sustainable environment that everyone can live in, including our residents, our business, for the long term. And so my day-to-day, as we talk and think about climate change, involves thinking about from the base level of, like, if a resident comes in and wants to make improvements in their house, how can we provide them with the information to electrify or to install solar panels in a way that's understandable and feasible for them to do so, to larger, higher level thinking, to implementing these mitigation measures or these adaptation measures to the climate stressors we are seeing today. So it's a big task, and I'm really excited to be here to really talk about these very salient topics.
Great. Naomi.
I think talking about asking someone their role in climate change these days is a pretty loaded question. But I mean, there's a whole section of this 300-something page book trying to explain that. But I think, like, the biggest impact that climate change has had on me so far is helping me figure out what I want to do with my life. And being a part of marine science conservation and outreach and trying to educate people on how they can mitigate the effects of climate change. But one way that I'm able to currently do that is as lead chair of the Teen Climate Council here at the Aquarium. I may not know all the details conveniently provided in this book, but neither do a lot of other teens in Long Beach and around the world. And so the Teen Climate Council is creating workshops and hosting events and providing resources to help educate teens on some of the topics outlined in books like these or talked about in conversations like these. And we're showing them that they can make changes on a daily basis to limit their CO2 emissions or be more sustainable without having those master's degrees in renewable energy or sustainability. And at the same time, we're building and fostering a community of climate activists and conservationists who are eventually going to be filling the roles of the people up here on the panel with me. And we're getting people on board now, supporting teens with resources and knowledge and motivation for when they do end up moving up. And yeah.
Sean, take it away.
Same question, I assume.
Yeah, you don't hit off.
All right. I have dedicated my career to inspiring people to service. In my current role at Leadership Long Beach, we are even more honed in on that personal goal of mine to inspire people to be involved civically and to engage in their communities in a way that they may not have done so before. So much of the origin story and the philosophy behind this entire almanac speaks very personally to the work that I have committed myself to do over the last couple of decades. And I really think that it just amplifies this idea that we are stronger together, that we have a greater impact and can magnify our impact by bringing people together, by having conversations, by inspiring people to do just one little thing new every single day. And that's really where I have focused my efforts. I have found that it is much easier to inspire those types of behaviors in our younger demographics than it is in our older demographics. And in our current work at Leadership Long Beach, we have completely retooled our teen curriculum to be totally based on sustainability, about global climate change, climate justice issues, and really envisioning sustainable futures, to provide opportunities for our teens, our local teens, to see themselves as part of the, not part of the problem, but part of the solution, and to envision themselves as climate justice warriors in whatever communities that they represent.
Great, thanks.
What about you, Dr. Kareiva? What are you doing as CEO of this fine, powerful establishment?
Think of me as Huck Finn, and you're Tom Sawyer. Okay? So that's my answer. No. I mean, seriously, one of the purpose of these first Wednesdays and everything is to have more of these conversations. So next week, you save me some time. I mean, next month, our first Wednesday is with someone who lived through and experienced Hurricane Sandy, and that so impacted her. She did her PhD thesis on it. And now her life's work, she's a faculty at UCLA, is about how coastal communities need to start thinking about sea level rise. So a lot of what I do is, at a personal level, is try to get people like you four to do the work for me. And then the other thing that I do is I do arcane research on it. But the arcane research, actually one of the most interesting things in research is disasters, and I'm really interested in how this changes how we think about uncertainty and disasters. But since you asked me that, so Naomi, you could tell already she's a leader, right? So Naomi gave me a question that she wanted me to ask. This is the last question of all panelists. This is for Robert as well, and then we'll open it to you guys. Naomi gave me a question she wanted me to ask. I'm not going to ask it. I'm going to ask a slightly different one, which is a little bit more pointed. Because her question was too easy. Your question, Naomi, was who do you think needs to be in the room to make these decisions and so forth? And I think we could all rattle off that. I want to ask a question of who do you worry is left out of the room currently that we need to invite into the room for these discussions? So that's my mutation of your question, Naomi. And to reverse orders, let's start with Sean.
Thank you, Peter. That is a good question. And I'm glad that you were inspired by the question that Naomi presented, which was a good one too. Global climate change and climate injustices disproportionately affect people of lower socioeconomic backgrounds, people of color, underserved communities that we hear all about. And those are the communities, those are the people that I am focused on really bringing to the table, not only bringing to the table, but ensuring that they feel like they belong at that table. It's one thing to extend an invitation, it's another to ensure that everyone is hearing the same story and these issues are resonating with them. And we see that here in Long Beach very dramatically. It's a tale of two cities here. We have very affluent and well appropriated east side of our city, and a much different story on the west side. More resources dedicated to our coastal areas, far fewer dedicated to our regions in the north. And so the people that really need to be part of this conversation are the folks who are going to be impacted the most, and those are the people with the least resources.
Great, thank you. Really?
Well, surprise, surprise, I'm worried that teens are left out of the conversation. We need to be in the room where it happens, to quote Hamilton. Like I said, we don't all have master's degrees in sustainability or renewable energy. And I mean, when I was given this book last week, I'm not going to lie to you, I was kind of terrified. But so we have to make this work more accessible, you know, decipher it into actions that teens can be taking, immediate actions. And one of the things that teens can be doing is being in the room where these discussions are happening. We might not have those advanced degrees, but there are people who do, and that's amazing, and we can lean on them. They can provide us with the support and the background information that we need to help make these decisions. And if teens are involved in the initiatives that are being started now, who's to say we're going to carry them on 5-10 years later when it's our responsibility? These decisions are going to be impacting our lives, and so we need to be there when they're being made. Like the way I'm on this panel right now with these leaders. And, you know, we want to help. We've been on board since the beginning. A lot of our work up to this point has been convincing people that climate change is real, it's a real threat, and we need to be doing something about it. But teens have been on board. We're ready to help, but we need to actually be there. We need to be present to be able to make a difference.
Thank you. And you're a president.
Yeah, I loved Sean's answer talking about disadvantaged communities. When we talk about the Long Beach Climate Action Plan that was rooted in community input, it was really focused on viewing our climate crisis through an equity lens. And so we know that communities that are disadvantaged, those that are low income, those come from communities of color, disproportionately feel the effects of climate change and will do so for the long term. And so how can we really mitigate these effects and really address these problems early on? From the city's perspective, as we do collaboration, engagement, and input, we really need everyone at the table, and that means being innovative in the way that we do outreach. And that means going out to those places and those spaces that we don't normally go to, whether that's libraries, churches, parks, places where people feel comfortable, where the places like City Hall may be not as accessible. Making those innovative small tweaks and adjustments, whether that's providing different languages at these events, at these community events, to really engage the public and collaborate is key to really getting those people to the table. So while the easy answer is everyone, we are doing the work, and there's always work to do to engage communities that are disadvantaged so that we can really pursue an equitable future and sustainable future as well.
Great, thank you. And Robert, with just a slightly different angle, I mean, this network's been out, it's been functioning. Do you have any insights into like who you wished you could reach more, you haven't, or maybe you've reached everybody, or just sort of your take on this question of who seems to be not as much part of the conversation as you might have wished?
Thank you for asking me that question. That's my humming up, you know. No, seriously, the thing that I would say I've learned the most in the process of doing this has been what I think is the disproportionate power of local and regional action. It's true that the federal government, for example, in the US can pass the IRA, right? But doing that is meaningless unless those resources actually get implemented. And I've been really impressed, particularly in California, with what has been happening in various aspects of sustainability and climate that's, I think, way ahead of much of the rest of the United States. So I'll add that to the mix, that the table, yes, there's a national table and there's a Fortune 50 table and all that, and those will always be hard to penetrate, but it is the local and regional action that matters, and that is merely a yes and to everything that the three of you have said.
Terrific. All right, so now we're going to have about 10, 15 minutes for you to ask questions of any of us except for me. And, and then we'll break for cocktails, conversation, and you pick up your free book. So with that, We have some folks to run around with, get the lights up so that people, you can see your hands. Just raise your hands if you have a question, and you could direct them you could say anyone who wants to answer, or you could direct them to a particular person based on their role.
Do they have to be questions?
Yes, they have. Yeah, we don't want.
I just want to check for help.
Yeah,
No speeches.
yeah. But you know how questions go in these things. Questions often are prefaced with a little bit of a statement.
I got it, Peter.
Oh, no. I know this
your-
guy, that's why I said that.
Your
I won't say
opening
that to others.
screenshot cited Norman Borlaug winning the Nobel Prize for the Greening Revolution. The year was 1970. The world population at the time was 4 billion people. Today's population is 8 billion people. Norman Borlaug's speech, which you can Google and get, was all about population control. It had nothing to do with the science. Is there a chapter in your book on population control? Since Norman Borlaug won the Nobel Prize for saving 1 billion people,
That's right.
but now we've surpassed that, and Paul Ehrlich turned out to be right, even though they said that Paul Ehrlich solved the problem.
So, since I didn't write every bit of the book, I can't say that, and even though I read through it 2-3 times, I think the population stuff is, particularly in the first third of the book, is referenced throughout. I'm not sure there's a specific.
I did read, I don't know if it was today or yesterday or where it was at in the book, but I did read one entry about fertility rates and that those are declining globally, much more readily in more resourced nations than under-resourced nations, but that there is a global trend of declining fertility rates. So I don't know if that really, right. Right. So I didn't read a page specifically tackling that question, but there is some of that information in this book that I've uncovered so far.
Yeah, so just to address the last question, I'm Maureen. I did work on the book, and one of the areas I worked on were the resources and citations. And let me tell you, there's a lot of citations referencing that information, the issue of population control, the trends, where they've gone, where we thought they were going to go, the change in the trends. It is addressed in the book, so yes.
Go right there.
Good evening. I recently joined a group called Third Act, which was started by Bill McGibbon, who's one of the earliest writers about climate crisis. By the way, I hate the word climate change. It's too neutral, and it's like people can write it off. We got to say climate crisis. Anyway, this is a group of baby boomers. We're trying to get us together in our retirement now to make a difference while we still have a chance, recover that idealism of the 60s. And our first approach is the banks, Chase, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America. And I was on the street on Monday, and I'm learning that there are many organizations working towards this. My question is, how do you think we can those organizations work together collectively? What do we need to do because we just seem to be just separate? So do you have some ideas about that?
Do you have any ideas, Robert?
So the first step is get in touch and talk. Different organizations, despite their stated common missions and goals, often have different motivations. Sometimes that's a result of personal quirks of leadership or whatever. Some groups bring more ego into it than others. And in some cases, people have kind of a purity model about their action, and so any group that's not 100% like them, they don't want to work with. All that stuff has to get worked through, or we will have problems. But you don't know that till you get in touch with the other groups first.
Yeah. And I'll take a stab at answering that from a slightly different point of view, because I've worked in the nonprofit world and conservation since, I guess it would be 1985, 1987. And environmental nonprofits, I mean, with fixed organizations, have always struggled a little bit with collaborating, even though they share the same values and mission, partly because they have fixed staff, they have to identify their own unique niche and raise money. One of the things that's striking about this, it's not an organization with a big bunch of staff that you have to, say, look at us, we're doing it better than everybody else, so give us money. So that, I just found that kind of fascinating about the book. But they do sometimes come together. The time I remember when they all came together, there was a time period when the Endangered Species Act was under threat. And there was not a single environmental conservation NGO or environmental organization that didn't get in touch and avert that threat. I mean, it was somehow they all came together. So what you describe is systemic to nonprofits, frankly, to a certain extent, but at the same time, they can sometimes come together. And I'm thinking this is one of the issues where I hope they do what you say. Other questions?
Hi, my question is for Carlene. I was wondering what the city might be doing to get classes into the high schools, into the local colleges, so that the kids can be educated with respect to this moving forward.
That's a great question. So in reference to really educating our youth, the state recently allocated $6.3 million to develop what it's called a Youth Climate Corps. And so what that does is really, it's run through our economic development department to engage youth across different ages from, I believe it's 18 to 30, so there's a huge span, to provide different types of works, and by the end of the program, the program participant will either have a job or continue with school. And that's a significant program because it provides an opportunity to not just engage and learn, but it provides long-term ways to produce green jobs and a green labor supply, as the lack of a better word. And in terms of really engaging our schools, again, there's a lot of work to do and a lot of great ways to really engage our youth, and that's the power in having a generation that's so compassionate and so active. Our Office of Sustainability is constantly trying to engage in our local schools to get volunteers, to intern climate fellows, as well as provide demonstrations. So Willow Springs serves as a really great demonstration place to learn about urban agriculture, to learn about how we can really protect our watersheds. And of course, if you all have any interests or have any further recommendations, I would love to hear about it further, because we are always looking for ways to do outreach and really engage in people that may not currently have a voice or have had an ability to participate in the way that we really interact with our public, and we need to really improve and continue to improve the way that we reach out to everyone, especially those of a younger age, for our future, of course.
If I could just add a little bit to that and provide a little more background to that question from my perspective at Leadership Long Beach. One of the main reasons that we changed our curriculum 4 years ago for our youth, for our high school program, was because their environmental sustainability, environmental sciences were not taught in every one of our schools, here, our high schools here in Long Beach. And in fact, I think that that curriculum is only available in a small number, fewer than half. And we really wanted to provide that level of education and that investment in our teens that don't have access to that education in their current high school curriculum. And further, just last year we piloted a middle school program that is directly focused on environmental science and environmental sustainability as well, because that curriculum is even less available to our middle school students here in Long Beach. So there is significant work to do there, and I do want to amplify Carlene's statement that the city is really invested in that, and they from my perspective, are really doing a very good job, but there is an awful lot of work to still do.
And I'd love to touch on that too really quick if I can. So the state and the city is obviously doing a lot of work to try and get this education into our schools and these curriculums into our schools. But there are also organizations or groups like the Teen Climate Council and outside groups who are helping to reach students who aren't getting that education in the classroom, but also trying to reach kids at a young age too. One of the things that Teen Climate Council does is a water conservation curriculum with preschool and elementary school students, because we need to start, it's amazing that high schoolers and middle schoolers can get involved, but this should be the value that climate action is a value that should be taught at a young age, starting with elementary school students and preschool students, and raising them to have these habits and these values, like turning off the water when they're brushing their teeth, or not leaving the water running when they're doing dishes, things like that, to help raise the next generation of climate activists.
Hi. As a teacher, I've done a lot of what Naomi's talked about in terms of getting the youth to, conserve. And in the back of my mind, I always think about the bigger picture, about like who's in the room. Maybe this is for Robert. How do we, the oil companies have known, decades and decades ago and we know that bottom line, it's because the corporations want profit, and they think short term in terms of long term. And so not just at an individual level, but among these, the banks are funding the companies. How can we get companies that are the biggest people in the room who make these decisions, and whether it's about how you produce cement, which has a big carbon imprint, how do you get them to think in terms of the long-term profit of acting in a way that helps the environment versus thinking in terms of short-term profits?
Well, that's a big question.
Naomi, you take that.
So it's people far smarter and wiser than I have noted that our current political and economic system is set up so that the private sector reaps all the benefits, and all of the costs, or call it the externalities, are borne by the public in the present and the future. That is a problem that's obviously very difficult to solve. Part of it is that what's called shareholder capitalism. Capitalism that only has one stakeholder, which are the shareholders, is on a very rapid pace, which involves short-term thinking, quarterly Wall Street cycles. So one thing that could happen is change those reporting cycles to make people think longer. But the biggest thing that could be done, and it's trying to get going, is to price in the true cost of carbon. Let's call it carbon, even though it means all of the pieces. Really price it in a accepted way and in a regulated way. That would be the only way to get systemic change at that level that we can see. In fact, there is a piece in the almanac on what's called the discount rate. And the discount rate sometimes applies to what the Federal Reserve does, but what we're talking about in this article is how investors, whether they're inside a corporation or they're outside investors, create an expected rate of return. And if you don't price in the full cost, then an investment looks one way. But if you price in the full cost, it looks another way. And if we could somehow get accounting rules to do that, you would see a change in company behavior. I hope that helps.
Just to add to that, Robert, I mean, many of you probably know that shareholder capitalism has not been the case forever.
That's right.
Shareholder capitalism, there was a sense earlier when capitalism, when companies evaluated what they were supposed to serve, it was the nation, the community, and profits.
Right.
And so it's a little bit, it's not inextricably linked to capitalism, if you will. And the other thing is, it's interesting you said about the reporting cycle. Unilever, a while back, had a CEO named Paul Pullman, and he changed to annual reporting as opposed to quarterly reporting. Unilever, for a while, was really a leader globally as a corporation interested in conservation, biodiversity, and climate change. So there have been some experiments. I think we're getting close to 8 o'clock, and really the fun of this is for you to pick up the book and to flip through it and to have conversations over a drink or wine or beer. So let's thank the panelists here and the speakers. And sea level rise and cities on the coast. And come down, you exit through the bottom here, and you'll go out and you'll see a bar on your left, and you keep walking on your left, there'll be a bunch of tables. You just pick up your book. There's tables to sit at and sit around and flip through it and have good conversations. We'll all be around to answer your questions, and I think Naomi can answer them all. All right, thank you.